The candle flickers against velvet walls, throwing shadows that look like ghosts of the past. You hear the slow creak of polished boots pacing over marble floors, a sound that once meant power but now whispers danger. The air is heavy with incense and secrets, laced with the metallic scent of blood that history tried to wash away. Behind silken drapes, a woman kneels, not in prayer, but in despair, her voice swallowed by the silence of a palace that never forgave disobedience. You are told the royals lived in luxury, wrapped in jewels and silk. But what if that silk was only a shroud, hiding chains too dark to name? The truth is not written on golden thrones. It lingers in locked chambers, whispered betrayals, and scandals so damning they threaten to topple crowns themselves. The year is the late 1700s, and the palaces of Britain gleam like cathedrals of power. To the outside world, they are temples of stability. Chandeliers blazing with candlelight, polished silver trays carried by silent servants, halls echoing with the proud footsteps of kings and queens. You would think, looking from afar, that this was the pinnacle of human achievement, a dynasty built on divine right, chosen to rule by heaven itself. But step closer, and the perfection begins to crack. Behind every polished portrait, hung on gilded walls, is a smear of truth that no painter was permitted to show. The rouge on a queen's lips hides the bitterness of a forced marriage. The jewels around her throat glimmer, but they also weigh heavy, like chains disguised as ornaments. The British royal family sold the world an illusion of majesty, carefully crafted through ceremonies, portraits, and staged appearances. The people outside the gates were taught to believe in this fairy tale, that their monarchs were flawless beings, above mortal weakness. Yet within those very walls, scandals brewed like storms. There were affairs whispered about in corridors, pacts sealed not with love but with political convenience, and women who bore children not for desire but for duty. The crown demanded loyalty, silence, and obedience, and for those who faltered, punishment was swift. Imagine the grand ballroom. Velvet curtains drawn back, violins playing, ladies swirling in gowns that sparkle under crystal light. It looks like a dream. But if you listen closely, beneath the music, you hear the quiet sobbing of a bride who never chose her husband. You hear the murmurs of advisors plotting against the very blood they serve, and you smell the faint, lingering trace of scandal, perfume mixed with fear. This was the truth behind majesty, a stage built on lies, maintained at any cost. The illusion of majesty was never accidental. Every candlelit procession, every portrait in flowing robes, every carefully chosen word in public was designed to convince subjects that their monarchs were untouchable, almost divine. But within the palace, those same rituals felt like iron bars on a cage. A queen was expected to smile, to bow her head, to stand at her king's side as though she were carved from marble. Yet marble cracks under pressure, and in those years, the pressure was unbearable. Marriage was not a union of hearts, but a transaction between kingdoms. A young princess brought into the family was less a bride than a bargaining chip, her body the ledger of treaties and heirs. Some tried to rebel quietly. They exchanged glances with forbidden lovers, wrote letters in coded language, or whispered their despair to trusted servants. But even whispers could be fatal. The palace walls had ears, and scandal was the most dangerous weapon of all. One rumor of infidelity, one suggestion of betrayal, and a queen could find herself shunned, disgraced, or worse. And yet the hypocrisy was staggering. Kings, draped in velvet and crowned with jewels, indulged openly in affairs, their mistresses paraded in plain sight. What was celebrated as charm in a king was condemned as sin in a queen. Women bore the shame, men bore none. Still, the illusion had to be preserved. If a scandal escaped the palace, it was swiftly buried. Painters were ordered to retouch portraits. Diaries disappeared, servants silenced with threats or coin. The story told to the people was one of unity, harmony, and divine order. But behind closed doors, the crown was already beginning to rot from within. The public never saw the midnight confrontations, the bitter silences at royal dinners, the sleepless nights spent staring at gilded ceilings. They saw only what they were meant to see, majesty without flaw. Yet the cracks in the illusion were spreading, and soon they could no longer be hidden. To understand the depth of the illusion, you must imagine the palace itself, a place where silence carried more weight than truth. Corridors lined with portraits stared down at every passerby, faces of long-dead monarchs reminding the living of duty, obedience, and legacy. Every stone was meant to whisper the same message. The monarchy is eternal, and you are merely its servant, but eternity is fragile when it rests on human hearts. Many of the women inside the royal family were little more than prisoners in silk. They smiled for the painter's brush. They bowed to foreign ambassadors. They produced heirs as demanded. But beneath the lace and pearls, fear ran like cold water through their veins. Fear of displeasing a husband who was also a king. Fear of advisors who measured their worth only in children born. Fear of scandals that could end not just their lives, but the lives of their children. And yet, even in that gilded prison, desire for freedom flickered. Some queens confided in ladies-in-waiting, trading secrets in the dark. Some left hidden diaries that revealed the truth of what they endured. Others, bolder still, tested the limits of the system, daring to reach for affection where they could find it, daring to imagine a life beyond their royal mask. These attempts at freedom, however small, carried dangerous consequences. For every whispered rebellion, there was an equal and opposite act of suppression. A servant dismissed for knowing too much. A woman's reputation ruined by a single accusation. A crown that smiled in public but punished brutally in private. The grandeur of the royal family was, in truth, a theatre. Each performance was rehearsed, each gesture designed to keep the people believing. But the performers themselves, the kings, the queens, the mistresses, the children, were trapped in roles they did not choose. And as history would show, when illusions are built on secrets and scandals, they eventually collapse. The palace walls could not hold back the storm forever. The crown was not only a symbol of power, it was a set of chains, gilded so beautifully that the world mistook them for glory. Life inside the royal family was bound by rules so strict, so suffocating, that even the simplest human desires became dangerous. A queen could not love freely. A prince could not marry for affection. Even a young princess, barely old enough to understand her role, was told from the moment she could walk that her life belonged not to herself, but to the dynasty. Every breath, every gesture, every word was measured against expectations. The rules were invisible, yet everywhere. Rise when summoned, bow when ordered, smile when watched. Speak too much and you risked insult. Speak too little and you risk suspicion. It was a system designed to crush individuality, to turn human beings into living symbols of the monarchy. And it worked, for a time. In public, the royals appeared flawless, their silks shimmering in candlelight, their jewels blazing as though they carried the sun itself. But beneath that shine lay suffocation. The women of the family, in particular, bore the heaviest chains. Their worth was calculated in heirs produced. Their silence demanded, even when their hearts screamed. Disobedience was not just rebellion. It was treason against the very crown they served. A woman who stepped outside the rules could lose everything. Her title, her children, even her life. And yet within the palace, disobedience was not rare. It simmered quietly behind closed doors because no cage, no matter how golden, can contain the human spirit forever. Every whispered scandal, every forbidden glance, every letter slipped into secret hands was an act of survival. And survival itself became an unspoken rule of the royal game. But these chains of silk and gold did not only restrain, they also corrupted. For those who learned how to bend the rules, survival turned into power. And power, once grasped, would be wielded without mercy. The hypocrisy of royal life was staggering. Kings, crowned as the embodiment of virtue, broke the very rules they demanded from others. Mistresses were not just tolerated but celebrated, their beauty and charm paraded before courtiers like trophies of conquest. A king's indiscretions were whispered about with amusement, a wink, a shrug, as if they were proof of masculine strength. But for queens, the law was iron. A single rumor of unfaithfulness was enough to bring ruin. The same act that raised a king's reputation could destroy a queen's entirely. Her body belonged to the crown, her womb to the dynasty. To give her love elsewhere, even in thought, even in secret, was to risk being branded a traitor. The punishments were not always executions or prisons. Sometimes they were quieter, more insidious. A queen might be isolated, her closest servants dismissed one by one. Letters could vanish, replaced with forged words meant to entrap her. Rumors were carefully seeded among courtiers until no ally remained. Her children might be taken from her side, raised under the watchful eye of others, as though she were no longer fit to be their mother. And yet, despite this suffocating weight, scandal persisted. Human hearts rebelled against chains no matter how golden. Affairs blossomed in secret corridors, trysts hidden behind locked doors and drawn curtains. Some queens learned the dangerous art of disguise, slipping notes through maids, arranging stolen moments with lovers who risked their own lives for the chance to defy the crown. But secrecy had its price. A single betrayed confidence, a single intercepted letter, could unravel everything. The court thrived on gossip. Whispers were currency, and betrayal a path to favor. Servants, advisors, even family members could trade a queen's secret for advancement. Thus the palace became a theatre of masks, where smiles hid daggers and loyalty could never be trusted. Chains of silk and gold might glitter under candlelight, but they cut just as deeply as iron. For those who survived the crown's suffocating rules, mere obedience was never enough. To endure in such a world, You had to learn the hidden art of strategy. Every smile became a calculated move, every silence a shield, every tear either a weapon or a liability. The women of the royal family became masters of survival. They studied the moods of kings as though they were storms, adjusting their behavior to avoid lightning strikes. They learned how to flatter courtiers, how to charm advisors, how to turn enemies into allies with a single well-placed word. What began as submission slowly transformed into influence, and influence within the palace was as valuable as an army. A queen who appeared powerless might, behind her veil of silence, control the very flow of information to the king. A mistress, dismissed as frivolous, could whisper a name at the right moment and determine who gained a title, who lost a fortune, who was cast into exile. The system of chains bred cunning. Each scandal, once a threat, became a tool. Secrets could be traded for protection. Rumors could be spread not only to destroy, but to shield oneself. Even the act of suffering, performed at the right time before the right eyes, could earn sympathy and sway decisions at the highest level. But this constant game of masks came at a cost. No one could ever be trusted fully. Love was always shadowed by suspicion, loyalty by fear of betrayal. Children were raised not only as heirs, but as bargaining pieces, pawns in games they could not yet understand. The palace walls rang with music and laughter in public, but in private, they echoed with paranoia. The chains of silk and gold had achieved their purpose. They did not merely bind, they reshaped those who wore them, turning survivors into players of a ruthless game where scandal was both the deadliest weapon and the sharpest shield. In the royal courts of Britain, a whisper could be sharper than a sword. Palaces that dazzled with chandeliers and silk were also filled with invisible daggers. Rumors that slipped through corridors, carried by servants, scribes and courtiers hungry for advantage. It did not take much. A glance too long at a courtier, a child whose features resembled the wrong man, a woman who prayed in secret, or studied books not sanctioned by the church. Any of these could ignite whispers that spread like wildfire, consuming reputations, destroying families, even ending lives. Accusations of witchcraft were especially deadly. In an age when the church's shadow loomed large, a queen who stepped outside her prescribed role could easily be painted as dangerous, unnatural, or cursed. A miscarriage might be blamed not on medicine's ignorance, but on dark forces. A woman too clever, too outspoken, or too beloved was at risk of being branded a witch, her ambition twisted into sorcery in the eyes of her enemies. Illegitimacy was another whisper that poisoned dynasties. The crown demanded heirs, but it demanded them to be unquestioned. If a child's lineage was doubted, the scandal did not only disgrace the mother, it threatened the very stability of the throne. Rumors of secret lovers, adulterous queens, and hidden children could unravel dynasties, sparking wars over succession. The danger was not only in the truth, but in the lie. A fabricated rumor could destroy as effectively as fact, and often with less risk. No proof was needed. Only enough voices repeating the same poisonous tale until it became impossible to silence. And so, behind the glitter of royal life, everyone lived under the same unspoken terror. That one whisper, barely audible, could become a death sentence. Rumors in the royal court were never idle talk. They were weapons, sharpened and aimed with precision. A jealous rival could plant a single story, and within days it would coil through the palace like smoke, choking its target until nothing remained but disgrace. Sometimes the whispers came from enemies. A slighted noble, denied a favor or stripped of a title, could exact revenge not with steel but with words. They would murmur of a queen's disloyalty, of a prince's weakness, of a princess's secret meetings with men in shadows. The lie did not need proof. Suspicion alone was enough to wound. But more often, the most dangerous whispers came from within the family itself. Brothers whispered against sisters, cousins against cousins, even children against parents. The crown was too valuable, too tempting. To ascend meant wealth, power, safety. To fall meant humiliation or death. And so, bloodlines were turned into battlefields where words struck harder than swords. Courtiers learned to listen as much as they spoke. A misplaced comment could ruin not only the speaker, but their household for generations. Servants carried rumors upward, weaving truth and fiction together in ways no one could unravel. Even the silence of a servant could speak volumes. Why was this chambermaid dismissed so suddenly? Why did this butler vanish overnight? Every absence became another story. The court thrived on paranoia. To be trusted fully was impossible. To be loved was dangerous. Alliances shifted like sand, built and broken on the strength of rumors whispered in candlelit halls. And yet, for those who mastered the art, rumors were a ladder. A clever word at the right moment could topple a rival or elevate an ally. Lies could shape politics, bend kings and ignite wars. In a world where crowns balanced on fragile heads, a whisper could change history. When whispers grew too loud to be ignored, they transformed into verdicts. The palace, with all its gilded halls and velvet drapes, became a courtroom where reputations were tried in silence long before official charges were ever spoken. A queen accused of infidelity might never face her accuser directly. Instead, the evidence was shaped by gossip, by intercepted letters, by testimony bought with coin or coerced with threats. Once suspicion was planted, it spread like rot, hollowing her image until even her most loyal allies hesitated to defend her. And when her trial came, the verdict was already sealed. Some faced the blade, heads rolled not only for treason, but for whispers of treason, as if rumour itself carried the weight of proof. Others were cast into exile, their names scrubbed from portraits, their existence rewritten as a cautionary tale. A princess who once danced in candlelit halls could become a ghost in a foreign land, erased from the dynasty she once served. But the cost was not only personal. Dynasties themselves cracked under the strain of scandal. Questions of legitimacy splintered succession lines, leading to civil wars that bled nations dry. Accusations of sorcery and witchcraft inflamed religious divisions, setting subjects against one another in hysteria. The crown, desperate to appear unshaken, often tightened its grip. But the tighter the grip, the more it revealed its fragility. And so, whispers became weapons not just of courtiers, but of history itself. They toppled queens, rewrote bloodlines, and reshaped kingdoms. A rumour spoken in a quiet corridor could ripple outward until it altered the fate of millions. In the end, the palace was not defended by walls or soldiers alone. It was defended by silence, by the desperate hope that secrets would never escape. But secrets always did. Scandals do not die, they echo. Long after the silken gowns have rotted away, long after the jewelled crowns have tarnished, the whispers remain, reshaped into stories, myths, and warnings passed from one generation to the next. For the British monarchy, these shadows became part of its very foundation. A queen disgraced in her lifetime might later be remembered as a martyr of circumstance. A scandal once buried in silence might resurface decades later, retold by historians as proof that the crown itself was never as unbreakable as it claimed. The monarchy endured, but it endured by weaving its darkest truths into carefully controlled narratives. Sometimes, scandals brought change. The public outrage over royal excess forced reforms in spending and conduct. Trials and executions, once staged as theatre to preserve power, became cautionary tales that reshaped how monarchs approach marriage, succession, and faith. What was once whispered in secret became written into law, ensuring that no single rumour could again unravel the throne so easily. Yet shadows are not only lessons, they are ghosts. Palaces that once hid forbidden affairs now open their chambers to curious tourists, their guides retelling the very scandals that once threatened to destroy dynasties. The scent of candle wax, the creak of ancient floorboards, the portraits watching silently from their gilded frames, all carry with them the unspoken memory of betrayal, fear, and longing. The monarchy survived by evolving, but survival came at a cost. It meant sacrificing individuals for the illusion of permanence. Queens erased from history, children quietly declared illegitimate, entire lives reduced to footnotes, all to preserve the myth of an unshakable crown. And so the legacy of scandal was not simply destruction, it was transformation. Each fall of a royal figure carved a deeper understanding of what power truly required: sacrifice, silence, and shadows. The corridors of the palace grew quieter as the years passed, yet the silence carried more weight than sound ever could. Whispers no longer lingered at court. They had hardened into truths carved deep into memory. The princess, now marked by time and sorrow, had become a ghost within her own chambers, her figure frail, yet her presence still commanding a silent reverence. The king, once surrounded by courtiers and flatterers, walked among portraits of ancestors, whose gazes seemed to judge his every decision. The weight of lineage pressed upon him, but even his crown could not shield him from the legacy of cruelty that now clung to his name. Shadows stretched longer in the grand halls, not from the light of torches, but from the unspoken sins of a dynasty that fed upon obedience and silence. Every child born of the princess had become a living symbol of both survival and imprisonment. Their footsteps echoed in rooms too vast for joy, their laughter rare, quickly swallowed by the heavy air. Servants carried out duties with lowered eyes, fearful of being drawn into the stories that no one dared to tell aloud. The palace itself seemed altered, as if its stones had absorbed centuries of grief. Tapestries dulled, gilded frames tarnished, and the scent of incense could no longer hide the decay beneath the grandeur. A place once meant to display power had become a mausoleum of suffering, a stage where duty had triumphed over humanity. Yet beneath this weight, the princess's gaze still held a quiet fire. Though her voice rarely rose above a whisper, It carried the strength of endurance, a silent rebellion against the chains of her existence. She had become more than a victim. She was the embodiment of remembrance, ensuring that every cruelty, every forced silence, would not vanish into history's convenient forgetfulness. The legacy of shadows was not one of kings and crowns, but of the silent endurance of those who bore the burden of obedience, their stories etched in the very air of the palace. And though their names might fade, the shadows they left behind would remain, haunting every throne built upon sacrifice. As the seasons shifted, the rhythm of the palace grew slower, as though time itself resisted moving forward. The king aged with bitterness etched into his face, his crown no longer a symbol of power, but a weight he could not put down. His halls echoed with fewer voices, fewer celebrations. Power had brought him silence, but not peace. The princess, worn but unbroken, walked the dim corridors like a figure carved from endurance. Her steps were soft, yet each carried the weight of countless sacrifices. In her eyes, a strange clarity had taken root, the recognition that survival itself had become her form of defiance. Where others saw frailty, she bore the quiet strength of one who had endured the unimaginable. The children, once symbols of obedience, now carried the restless spirit of unanswered questions. They studied their mother's silence and their father's severity, torn between fear and compassion. To them, the palace was both cradle and cage, a place where loyalty was demanded, but warmth was rare. Whispers outside the walls grew louder. The people spoke of injustice, of a queen who suffered unseen, of a king who ruled by iron will but lost the trust of his household. The grandeur of the dynasty began to tarnish, not from war or rebellion, but from the slow, steady corrosion of cruelty that lingered in every chamber. By candlelight, the princess sometimes pressed her hands against the cold stone, as though leaving her mark for those who would come after. She knew her story might never be sung in ballads or etched in gilded chronicles, but in the silence, she had carved her truth into the walls, into the memories of her children, into the very air of the palace. The legacy of shadows stretched far beyond her lifetime. It was a reminder that, beneath the crowns, behind the portraits, and within the gilded chambers, history was written not only by kings, but by the silent endurance of those who carried the heaviest chains. Innocence was promised, but control was delivered. Love was imagined, but chains were fastened. Queens became prisoners, princesses became pawns, and even kings were haunted by the very shadows they cast. Each chapter was not just history written in ink, but survival carved into flesh and silence. And yet, within these silences, something endured. A quiet defiance, a refusal to be erased. These women, mothers, lovers, daughters, were reduced by the crown to whispers, but their whispers outlasted thrones. They became the unspoken truth carried by the very walls of the palaces that confined them. The British royal family still wears its jewels, its rituals, its ceremonies, but every sparkling gem is haunted, every anthem carries an echo. Behind the grandeur lies the legacy of shadows, the scandals so dark they could never be confessed openly, but which shaped the monarchy in ways no ceremony can conceal. And as you leave this story, the question remains, when you look at a crown, do you see power, or do you see the silent suffering that built it?